I did not shake Turkey's hand so we could smile for the cameras. I shook it so that hand could plant grain beside our stitch, fabric beside ours, forge armor beside ours. Burkina Faso does not need another savior. We need allies to save ourselves.
For too long, contracts written in Paris and Washington have fed us chains and called them partnerships. Our gold has been melted in foreign refineries. Our cotton has clothed strangers while our own children wore rags. Our soldiers have defended borders with weapons they did not build under flags that were not their own. Today, that script is being rewritten. In a deal already sending tremors through intelligence circles and global markets, Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest head of state in Africa, has signed a multi-billion-dollar partnership with Turkey, one that could ignite an industrial, agricultural, and military awakening from the Sahel to the Sahara. This is not charity. This is not another IMF loan wrapped in the velvet of debt. It is a blueprint for sovereignty factories, homes, solar grids, and defense industries built on African soil by African hands. If you still believe justice belongs not to one nation, but to an entire continent, stay, because what you are about to hear will never make it to the evening news. In the heart of West Africa, a young captain named Ibrahim Traoré rose to power in 2022, not through the blessing of foreign capitals, but through the will of a people tired of waiting. In the eyes of the Western press, he was cast as a military hardliner, a radical nationalist. But in the markets of Ouagadougou and the villages of the Sahel, he was something far simpler and far more dangerous to the old order, a leader who listened. Under his watch, Burkina Faso broke ranks with the comfort of dependency. French troops were sent home. Key industries once in the hands of foreign companies were pulled back under national control. The country joined hands with Mali and Niger to form the AES alliance, three landlocked nations historically among the poorest, now declaring that their resources and security would no longer be dictated by anyone else. This defiance came at a cost. The West tightened its grip, diplomatic isolation, economic pressure, and the constant drumbeat of fear in international headlines. But where the old playbook expected a desperate turn back to the IMF, Traoré looked elsewhere. He sought partners who came not with lectures, but with tools. Turkey had been planting quiet seeds in Africa for years, building schools in Somalia, hospitals in Sudan, highways in Senegal, 43 embassies across the continent, flights to more than 60 African cities. They were not colonial powers returning to old hunting grounds. They were a mid-sized nation hungry for markets influence and alliances beyond the reach of Washington or Brussels. For Burkina Faso, the logic was clear: work with a partner that had never ruled you, never stolen your land, never dictated your textbooks. For Turkey, the appeal was equally sharp: a gateway into the Sahel, access to untapped mineral wealth, and a chance to become the builder of Africa's next industrial chapter. The result is a sweeping agreement: military production, textile factories, housing, agriculture, solar energy, and rail. 6 pillars of a plan that, if successful, will alter the balance of Africa news for years to come. But beneath the signatures and the smiles lies a deeper question: can this handshake remain one of equals? Or will history, so often unkind to Africa's bold experiments, try once again to turn partnership into dependence? When the agreement between Burkina Faso and Turkey was signed, it was not one tidy contract tucked in a diplomat's briefcase. It was 6 declarations of intent, 6 doors swung open at once, each one leading to a room the old colonial order would rather remain locked. First, military production. For decades, Burkina Faso's security was outsourced. Foreign troops patrolled our soil. Foreign suppliers sold us weapons at prices that bled our budgets. That era is ending. The deal includes a drone assembly plant, modeled after Turkey's Bayraktar TB2, the same drones that changed the battlefield from Libya to Ukraine. There will also be a light armored vehicle factory staffed and maintained by Burkina Faso engineers trained on Turkish assembly lines. And beyond hardware, a Turkish military advisory mission will establish permanent training in counterterrorism and strategic defense, It is not about buying weapons. It is about building the capacity to defend without permission, slips from Paris or Washington. Second, textiles. We grow cotton by the ton, yet we have shipped it raw for generations, letting foreign factories turn it into fashion, while we buy back the finished goods at a premium. That script is being rewritten. 3 major textile plants will rise in Koudougou, Bobo-Dioulasso, and Ouagadougou. Young men and women will be trained in design, industrial sewing, and export logistics. 10,000 jobs each one, a needle-stitching sovereignty back into our national fabric. Third, housing. The capital's skyline has long been shaped by concrete shells and unfinished dreams. The deal brings in Turkey's state-backed construction giant to build 30,000 affordable homes in 5 years. But here's the key. 60% of the investment stays inside Burkina Faso, with local sand cement and labor feeding the economy as the walls go up. These are not glass towers for diplomats. They are brick-and-mortar promises for working-class families. Fourth, agriculture. If you want to understand power, follow the food. Turkey will supply tractors, plows, irrigation systems, and more importantly, training centers in Dedougou and Fadangorma. Within 2 years, Burkina Faso's grain output is projected to triple. Food security, once a dream, could become a reality. The farmer from Yako, who has seen his harvest rot by the roadside, will now have a market both at home and across the AES trade network. Fifth, energy. There is no independence without electricity. Our nights have been too dark for too long. The agreement funds the largest solar farm in West Africa, 300 megawatts, along with rural solar grids, to bring power to villages that have known only kerosene lamps. Thousands of engineers, electricians, and technicians will be trained. This is not just electricity. It is the spark of industrial life. Sixth, rail. A landlocked country is a country on a leash. The extension of rail lines from Ouagadougou to Ghana's ports will cut that leash. In time, the lines will stretch toward Mali and Niger, forming a Pan-Sahel economic corridor. Freight that once crawled over potholes for days will reach the sea in hours. A region dismissed as isolated will become a crossroads. These pillars did not emerge from thin air. They are answers to decades of questions posed by African farmers, traders, soldiers, and builders. Why must our gold be refined elsewhere? Why do our children wear the cast-offs of other continents? Why must we beg for light in a land of sun? The Western reaction was swift and revealing. European media outlets framed the deal as a troubling military alignment and a blow to stability in the Sahel. French intelligence increased surveillance flights over Burkina Faso. U.S. diplomats quietly reached out to neighboring leaders, cautioning against non-traditional partnerships. The unspoken fear was clear. If Ibrahim Traoré pulls this off, the monopoly of influence the West has enjoyed in West Africa will begin to crumble. Turkey's message was equally direct. Africa is rising, declared Defense Minister Yaşar Güler, and Turkey will rise with it in friendship and trade and in shared strength. For Ankara, the benefits are undeniable access to raw materials, influence in a strategically shifting region, and a front-row seat in the next wave of Africa's industrial growth. But here lies the tension. Is this truly a partnership of equals, or will history repeat under a new flag? The skeptics within Burkina Faso warn of technology dependency, of contracts that seem balanced today but tip tomorrow. They point to other nations where joint ventures eventually meant foreign ownership and local debt. Traoré's supporters counter with a simple truth. Burkina Faso is no longer negotiating from its knees. This is not aid. It is not structural adjustment. It is a transaction born of choice, a word African nations have rarely been allowed to use in global trade. From the dusty training fields outside Ouagadougou to the textile floors being cleared in Bobo-Dioulasso, the question now is not whether the work will begin. It has already begun. The question is whether Africa can keep what it builds. On the surface, This was a trade deal, 6 sectors billions in investment, and a few well-rehearsed handshakes for the cameras. But peel back the polite language of memorandums, and you find something that makes old powers lose sleep. The truth is not that Burkina Faso is building factories or buying tractors. The truth is that Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré is proving you can industrialize without kneeling before the IMF, without accepting aid that comes wrapped in interest rates and conditions designed to keep you in place. For decades, Africa's development story has been written elsewhere, in boardrooms in Paris, in policy papers in Washington, in loan agreements stamped in Brussels. Every time a nation dared to dream outside, that script punishment followed sanctions, diplomatic isolation, whispers of instability to scare off investors. This is why Western reaction to the Turkey deal has been so sharp. It is not the hardware or the homes that scare them. It is the precedent. If Ibrahim Traoré can show that an African state can partner on equal footing, build advanced industries, and still hold on to its resources, then what stops Mali, Niger, Guinea, or Senegal from doing the same? Already the dominoes tremble. Reports have surfaced of Guinea in talks with Turkish textile investors. Senegal is eyeing Turkish solar partnerships. Chad has quietly sent a delegation to discuss military training. In each case, the logic is the same. If Burkina Faso can, why not US? Leaked documents from within French diplomatic circles, obtained by a West African journalist collective, speak plainly of the dangerous optics of the AES-Turkey alignment. One memo warns of a growing narrative in Africa news that French influence is obsolete. Another urges immediate countermeasures, increased aid, offers more cultural diplomacy, and tellingly closer monitoring of Turkish activities. The fear is justified. In the past, key sectors in Burkina Faso, from mining to energy, were often stalled or blocked outright when proposals threatened foreign interests. A domestic refinery project for gold was shelved under pressure in the late 2000s. Plans for textile mills in the 1990s were killed by cost analyses tied to foreign lenders. Now those same projects are rising from the dust, funded not by the former colonizer, but by a country with no colonial past in Africa. For the people, the shift is not abstract. Fadum 28. A seamstress in Bobo Dioulasso put it simply: "Before my cotton went away in trucks, now it will stay here. I will sew it. I will sell it." Issouf 22, a farmer from Yako, said, "They trained me on a Turkish tractor last week. I never thought I'd work with a machine that new." This is not just farming. This is dignity. Rocky 24, a university student in Ouagadougou, called it proof that Africa can rise if given a chance, or if it takes the chance itself. These are not staged quotes from a press release. They are the voice of a country tasting self-reliance for the first time in a generation. The West calls it authoritarian drift. When a leader refuses to follow their playbook, the labels come quickly. Radical, militarist, dangerous. They said it of Nkrumah Sankara Lumumba. They say it now of Ibrahim Traoré. Yet the people chanting his name in Ouagadougou streets are not reading think tank reports. They are reading the signs of actual change, jobs, infrastructure, power grids that light up at night. The panic is not about democracy. It is about control. The same capitals that stayed silent when foreign troops walked African streets now claim concern when African soldiers train on African-made equipment. The same institutions that applauded free markets now cry foul when Africa chooses its own markets. Turkey's stake is clear. Access to minerals, contracts for its companies, a foothold in a strategic region, and the chance to present itself as a builder nation in Africa news, not an exploiter. But the real gamble is on Burkina Faso's side. Traoré is betting that by diversifying alliances, Turkey, Russia, Iran, he can break the cycle of dependency without falling into a new one. It is a dangerous bet. History is heavy with examples of foreign partners turning into owners. Technology transfers can stall. Contracts can shift. Politics in Ankara could change. If Turkey's priorities turn inward or westward, will the factories keep running? Will the rail lines be finished? This is why the Turkey deal matters beyond its immediate output. It is a test, not just of machines and money, but of whether Africa can hold on to the steering wheel once it takes it. If Ibrahim Traoré succeeds, it will be a crack in the wall of global economic control. If he fails, the old order will point and say, "We told you so." And they will use that failure to keep the next African nation in line. From the streets of Ouagadougou to the conference halls of Brussels, the message is spreading: Africa is no longer waiting to be saved. It is saving itself. And in that truth lies the reason why some celebrate and others are quietly afraid. In the weeks after the signing, Burkina Faso felt different. It wasn't just the headlines in Africa news or the grainy clips of Ibrahim Traoré and Turkish ministers clasping hands. It was the hum of activity, the sound of cement mixers in Ouagadougou, the clatter of sewing machines being unpacked in Bobo Dioulasso, the sight of solar panels stacked like dark mirrors at the edge of the desert. For decades, progress in this land came in speeches, not in steel or stone. Now it was visible, tangible. You could walk past it on your way to the market. Economic shockwaves. In the first month alone, thousands of short-term jobs opened in construction, surveying, and logistics. By the third month, Turkish technical teams had begun training Burkinabe engineers, electricians, and mechanics. The textile sector, once reduced to exporting raw cotton, was already hiring and setting up design programs for young graduates. The IMF and World Bank issued careful, almost grudging statements about monitoring the situation. Behind those words was unease. If Burkina Faso could create growth outside the web of their lending structures, the narrative of African dependency would be harder to sustain. Regional domino effect. The AES alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, took the deal as a collective win. Malian officials openly discussed joint procurement of machinery and energy infrastructure from Turkey. Niger's military government announced it would send officers to study Burkina Faso's new defense production facilities. Beyond AES, the whispers grew louder. Guinea began exploratory talks on textile investments. Senegal's energy ministry sent a delegation to Ankara. Chad signaled interest in agricultural partnerships. One African diplomat put it plainly: if Ouagadougou proves this works, every capital from Dakar to Djibouti will have to rethink its playbook. Western pushback. Paris increased intelligence flights over the Sahel. EU foreign policy chiefs warned of strategic vulnerabilities if African states deepen military ties with Turkey. Washington sent envoys to neighboring countries, cautioning against non-aligned experiments, an ironic phrase for a continent long told to stand on its own feet. Media coverage in the West began to shift from cautious observation to open suspicion. Words like authoritarian militarization and destabilization peppered op-eds. The subtext was clear: if Africa builds its own industries, without Western oversight, it must be up to something dangerous. Internal tensions. Within Burkina Faso, the public mood was broadly supportive, but the deal was not without critics. Some economists warned of technology dependence. If Ankara pulls back, will the factories go silent? Others questioned the long-term ownership structure of joint ventures. Will they remain Burkinabe or slowly shift into foreign hands? Traoré's government responded with assurances every contract includes clauses on technology transfer and local majority ownership. But history has taught Africa that paper promises can be fragile. On the ground, changes. In Ouagadougou's industrial zone, a young woman named Awa stood in front of a sewing machine she just learned to use. Before this, I sold vegetables on the roadside, she said. Now I have a skill. I can send my daughter to school. In Dedougou, a farmer named Musa walked beside a newly delivered Turkish tractor. I used to plow by hand. I didn't think I'd live to see this day, he said. In Fadan Gourma, children watched as workers laid foundations for new housing. We'll move here when it's done, one boy told me. We won't have to share one room anymore. These were not propaganda reels. They were the lived proof of what the handshake had set in motion. The bigger picture. The most important consequence of the Turkey-Burkina Faso deal may not be the factories or rail lines themselves. It is the shift in African political imagination. For years, the choice seemed binary: accept Western aid with its conditions or fall into isolation. Traoré has offered a third path: diversified alliances, production on home soil, and contracts designed to keep wealth in African hands. If it succeeds, it will not only rewrite Burkina Faso's story, but challenge every African leader to answer a question their people will ask: why can't we do the same? And if it fails, the old order will point to it as proof that Africa can't survive outside its control. That is why the stakes are not just national. They are continental, and the clock is already ticking. The Turkey-Burkina Faso agreement is not just a contract. It's a signal flare in the night sky of global politics. It tells every African nation that the chessboard has more moves than the old masters would like you to believe. From defense to offense, for decades, African nations have played defense, reacting to sanctions, adjusting to commodity price swings, negotiating debt relief. Ibrahim Traoré has flipped the script. The AES alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, is no longer just expelling foreign troops. It is building the capacity to replace them, to feed itself, to manufacture, to export. This is a pivot from survival to strategy, breaking the dependency cycle. Dependency has always been the quiet empire's strongest weapon. Whether through loans, security assistance, or capacity, building the hand that feeds also controls. By sourcing military technology, agricultural machinery, and industrial know-how from a partner without a colonial past in Africa, Burkina Faso is diversifying its dependency and potentially reducing it altogether. If the technology transfers succeed, the country could become a regional hub for defense textiles and renewable energy. Turkey's calculation. For Ankara, this is more than altruism. Turkey gains access to West Africa's mineral wealth, new markets for its industries, and a political foothold in the Sahel, a region now tilting away from Paris and toward non-Western alliances. Turkey's broader Africa news footprint has been expanding for a decade. 43 embassies, dozens of infrastructure projects, flights to over 60 African cities. This deal cements that growth, a blueprint others could follow. If the model works in Burkina Faso, other African states can adapt it. Negotiate for local production rather than imports. Tie foreign investment to technology transfer and majority local ownership. Use regional blocks like AES to pool demand and negotiate from strength. This is a profound shift from the piecemeal country-by-country deals that have often left Africa divided and weakened in global trade, risks, and vulnerabilities. But strategy is never without risk. Turkey's political climate could shift. Ankara could face its own economic pressures, leading it to prioritize profits over partnership. Western powers, feeling their influence erode, could attempt to undermine the deal through sanctions, media narratives, or covert destabilization. And internally, Burkina Faso must guard against corruption, mismanagement, and the temptation to overextend. The historical lens. For an older generation of Africans and for Americans who marched at Selma or questioned the war in Vietnam, this moment should feel familiar. It echoes the 1960s wave of independence when leaders like Nkrumah Nasser and Sankara spoke of building a non-aligned future. Back then, many of those dreams were crushed by coups, assassinations, and economic sabotage. The question today is whether a younger generation, armed with new tools and alliances, can avoid the same fate. Why the West is nervous. This deal threatens more than just contracts. It threatens the narrative, the image of Africa as a place that must be saved, guided, and instructed, is a powerful justification for outside control. If Ibrahim Traoré proves that African states can design their own industrial future, it dismantles that image, and with it, a century of political leverage. The strategic long game for Burkina Faso. The real victory will not be in the next 5 years, but in the next 50. Will the drone factory be producing next-generation models designed by Burkinabe engineers? Will the textile mills export African brands, not just fill foreign orders? Will the solar farms be maintained and expanded without foreign technicians? If yes, this will stand as one of the first true breakouts from the post-colonial economic order. If no, it will join the long list of partnerships that began with promise and ended in dependency, a shared language of resistance. When African News reports on this deal, it's not just speaking to the people of Burkina Faso. It's speaking to workers in Ghana who want to refine their own cocoa, to farmers in Kenya tired of imported fertilizer, to engineers in Nigeria who want to assemble their own vehicles. And across the Atlantic, it should resonate with anyone who remembers questioning the morality of their own government's overseas adventures. Because in the end, this is not just about Africa. It's about whether any people anywhere can take back control of their economic destiny after generations of being told they cannot. If you still believe justice is not charity and sovereignty is not a gift, then you already understand the stakes of this moment. In 1965, marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma with nothing but their voices and their courage. They faced dogs, batons, and tear gas because they believed in a freedom that no government could give and no empire could take away. Today in the Sahel, that same spirit walks in different shoes. Farmers in Dédougou, machinists in Bobo-Dioulasso, students in Ouagadougou. They are not marching for the right to vote, but for the right to build. To own the land, they farm the machines, they operate the light that powers their homes. Ibrahim Traoré has staked Burkina Faso's future on the belief that sovereignty is not declared in speeches. It is manufactured, harvested, and wired into the grid by African hands. The Turkey deal is not the end of the struggle. It is the beginning of a test, and here's the truth. No headline in Africa, news will frame this way when a people begin to take back what was theirs. The world will try to stop them, not because it is wrong, but because it works. So the question is not just for Africans. It is for anyone who has ever marched, resisted, or refused to bow. Will you stand with those building their freedom from the ground up? Will you speak when the same powers that shadowed your history come to shadow ours? If you have ever believed in justice, then you know this is the moment to remember why.